Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland. This week, my co-host is Barbara Radnofsky. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you very
Always
much.
a pleasure having you here.
I'm glad to be here.
And this week's topic is something that I think is very important both to Barbara and I, and also should be to you, which is the homeless problem in Houston, which we've talked about before over the years, and it continues to be a problem. We have two great guests who are going to help explain the problem, what we're doing about it, and what we should be doing about it. First, Thao Costis, who's president and CEO of Search, which is a nonprofit involved in helping the homeless, and Marc Eichenbaum, who's the mayor's assistant on homeless initiatives. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So we've been talking about the homeless problem, I think, going back 15 or 20 years here, and it doesn't seem to go away. So why is it a persistent problem?
Well, you know, homelessness started in the late 80s, and it has been a difficult challenge because homelessness is not about just one thing. Absolutely, people need homes, but how they get there are issues related to mental illness, economy, jobs, criminal justice system. So it's the complexities of all of these that cause some of this to maintain. And luckily, we, in 2011, really made a shift in this. And so Houston has done a tremendous job and become a national model in reducing homelessness.
Well, and what's Tao's referring to is the Way Home Initiative. So this is a regional initiative between Montgomery County, Harris County, the City of Houston, and Fort Bend County, and where Search and the City of Houston are just two of the 100 agencies that are all working together through this initiative. In the past, when we would talk about collaboration, folks would say, I go to lunch with this person once a month. But what we're talking about is collective impact, really combining the resources, really combining the day-to-day efforts together to maximize that impact. And so we are working together like never before, but we're also embracing best practices, data-proven best practices. And we have finally found out the key to solving homelessness, and that is housing with supportive services. Now, the trick is to develop enough of that. But what we found is that when the most basic root cause to homelessness is the person doesn't have a house. Right. So if you put them into a house, they are no longer homeless. And not everybody gets a house, but everybody gets a path, whether that's on their own or with the help, to achieve that to achieve that independence and get off the streets.
What about low barrier shelters? We read about them, we hear about them. Where do those kind of places fit into the whole of what you guys are talking about?
It's needed. Shelters are places that most people will go to, but there are some that it's difficult for them because being in a shelter, you're with 100 plus other people, and so it poses some challenges to people, especially if they do suffer from mental illness and have certain anxieties about being in place. So as we are moving people quickly into housing, they are anxious to get into homes, but we can't get them moving quickly enough because of the complications of IDs. You have to have a birth certificate, you have to have all of these documentation. You have to find a place that would accept you given your criminal history or your rental history, and so it takes time. So they need a place to be, and fortunately the city has really been a big partner in helping us try to find the right place.
And I've heard that it's unique, almost unique in the country, this coalition that you have, that you've brought together across massive amounts of bureaucratic tape and bringing a tremendous amount of private initiative. How did all that happen, and what's the effect, particularly on the homeless themselves?
Well, back in 2011, the federal government came to Houston and said, you guys are not doing a good job. In fact, you have one of the highest populations of homelessness in the country. And so with that came some funding, technical assistance funding, but also at the time, the mayor worked with all the agencies to say, right now we're hearing anecdotal stories of success from each organization. Everybody talks about that one person that they helped out. But we really need to move the needle. And what can we do to move the needle? And so from that it became, if we have limited resources, let's invest in where we get the highest rate of return for the investment. And the common phrase was, show me the data, show us the data. if I put 5 different agencies around here and said, what's the key, they would probably say 5 different things. And so at the end of the day, it's show me the data, and wherever we can get the best results, that's where we're going to target our resources. But we had to go from managing the issue of homelessness. Managing just, you're trying to manage the effects of it. So the person's hungry, the person needs clothes, but they're still homeless, or you're just creating shelter. What is a homeless person in a shelter? Still a homeless person. And so now we went to, but let's now focus instead of managing on solving homelessness. And so now those shelters that you talked about, Barbara, those shelters are the front door. When an homeless individual walks in, they're going to be assessed for housing right there. And now that shelter, that soup kitchen is there. The food lures them in to the system where we can find out who they are, what their needs are, and we can get them on the path. So they're the front door now to getting folks off the streets and into housing.
Okay, but if you drive around the city, you find we still have 10 cities.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that concern me is, okay, where do these people go to the bathroom? Where do these people clean up? Where do they brush their teeth? Will they do anything basic sanitary? And it's obviously not good camping out underneath a freeway. I said you continue to see. We used to have, and it's coming back, a giant tent city near Minute Maid Park under the freeway. The whole thing, and I drive by there every day to go to court, and you'd see lots of trash and other stuff. And then baseball season came, and I'm sure the owner of the Astros said get rid of them, and they were gone. And then, of course, they kind of come back when we're off season. So it's still apparent that it's out there. The other thing is of concern is you drive the streets of Houston, and you're accosted periodically by a homeless person who's in the middle of the street, sometimes in a wheelchair, sometimes not, begging for money, which is, of course, very dangerous for them, being in the middle of the street, also dangerous for the drivers, and also potential problems. And my concern about this problem is 2 things. Number one, I think it makes the city less hospitable. And you've had businesses complain about homeless in their neighborhood, essentially destroying their business. But by the same token, it also, I think, encourages a callousness and coldness by citizens toward less fortunate people in the community, which is not a good thing either. So even though you all have made progress, and I know that looking at the statistics, in 2011 we had about 8,500 homeless. We're now estimated at about 4,100, probably not the same people because people come and go. Sure. But I'm concerned that it still seems to be a persistent problem. And one of the things that I read, and you probably are aware of, that some of the people don't want help. You said, okay, we want to know what you want to do. We'd like you to get shelter. They don't want shelter. They don't want rules. They want to be able to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it. So it continues to be a problem for our community, and I will mention that we should be investing money in our citizens because we invest so much money in people who enter the country illegally with shelter and food and God knows what else we do for them, but we're then not taking care of the people that are homeless and on the streets who are citizens. That troubles me. So
I think,
what else can we do?
Sure, there are 2 or 3 things that you've touched on. I'll let you talk about the panhandling one. That on the encampments and the tent cities, Houston had never had tent cities prior to about 2 years ago. And some of this is about unintended consequences of good-hearted people who were responding to human need and reacting to the fact that people were outside, so they gave them tents. And so while we were already in motion to move people quickly as possible into housing, now there's a whole different psychological aspect to having your own space and within your own little roof. So it does create a little more tension and, of course, absolutely the visibility. If we look back at downtown 5-10 years ago, downtown looked very different. Midtown was very different. The bayous were really not well trafficked, by us, by people who were pedestrians or bike riders. And now we've done an amazing job, and it's wonderful. And so it's a good thing that we've been able to reduce the number of people on the streets and in the shelters by 50%, because we would have a much bigger problem today. And so what's left are the places that people aren't going to be quite as noticed. So they're not in the downtown as much. Yes, we still have some folks that are really sick and are still in our downtown streets. But the bayous, you don't see the encampments that we used to see in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And so yes, there are still people on the street, absolutely. Are there as many as there were before? No. Will there always be around downtown? Likely. So how quickly can we move them off the street?
Well,
And
I
that's
know
what
the
we're doing.
police, I know you've been training the police, and the police have obviously, I mean the city and the entire group and interest, have been training the police to be very specialized in their approach to folks who are homeless and to try to get them into initially the low barrier shelters or some type of shelter. What do you do with the percentage, whatever, I'd be interested what percentage it is, of folks who don't want to do that?
There's not a percentage necessarily of
Okay.
people who don't want it. It's a very small number, and those are the people who are really off on their own. And so the police, they have a homeless outreach team, and they've been
That's the hot team,
the hot
right?
team. We call them
Okay.
the hot team, and it's the softer side of law enforcement. They really are out there to try to engage people, because we recognize that putting people into jails or giving them tickets because of they don't have a place to be, that it's not really helpful. So how do we help them get the ID quickly? How do we help them because you can't get a job without an ID. You can't really do anything without an ID. And so that's just the very beginning. But yeah, so it's all of us really trying to facilitate the process, because it's challenging.
And it's teaching officers de-escalation techniques and how to deal with those with mental illness. But the reality is we've housed more than 16,000 individuals since 2012, equating to over a 50% decline in homelessness. But we understand at the same time it doesn't always feel that way, especially with the encampments, Gary, that you had brought up. It's a phenomenon, this encampment, from everywhere from Salem, Massachusetts, to Austin, to Dallas, to Denver, to Seattle. Even Corpus Christi called us the other day to talk about their encampment issues.
And some places are actually making tent places where they have set aside places. What is y'all's view on setting aside places?
When we talk to the national experts on this, they advise against such method. The issue being is that the person is still homeless, they're still out in the elements, and I think Seattle's the prime example. They've done 4. They rotate them around to different neighborhoods every couple months. And now those 4 are full, and now they have to build another 4.
Because people are coming to Seattle because they hear it's so nice.
Well, at the end of the day, you have to have an exit door. And so the exit door is often housing, is that what we use. There are folks that do not want to go to shelter for whatever reasons. Sometimes they're very justified reasons, but the reality is if we offer those individuals housing, 99% of them will take us up on that. It's very, very difficult to house somebody who may have a challenging background, criminal record, may have some broken leases, evictions. But that's what Search and other agencies do that are part of the Way Home, that's organized by our Coalition for the Homeless, the lead agency for the Way Home. So they all work to do that, and that's why we're really so focused on housing. I think with encampments, no matter how you feel about them, we can all agree that Houston can do more. That's what this mayor believes on it, and that's why we're really focused on
How
housing
about
people out there.
panhandling on the streets, and the danger it creates for them and for drivers?
And that's a serious issue. So the reality is panhandling does have overlap with homelessness, but it is a completely separate issue. Local studies have shown about 50% of folks are homeless and 50% are not. And so the reality is, if you're giving to folks on the street, you have no idea if they're homeless or not, or what they're using the money for. That's why we ask for folks, if they really want to create change, there's a better way to give. And Houstonians are so giving. And one of those ways to give is to support organizations like Search, or one of the 100 agencies that are part of the Way Home, where you know that your dollars are going to get people off the streets. Panhandling is not safe for the person who's panhandling, nor for the driver. And it also makes it difficult for our outreach teams. If the individual is homeless, the outreach team goes out there, they're offering this support, they're trying to coax them to go with them to the short-term shelter or long-term housing. But if they're able to get all their needs met on the streets, it can be very difficult. So the reality is that it's not a homeless, if we housed all the homeless, there would still be panhandling.
So what are the police doing about the panhandling?
Oh, you'd have to ask the police.
We'll bring the chief back.
But the reality is that if you see somebody in need, It's saying, how can I help? The best way to help is to help the system, help these organizations are professionally trained to deal with these individuals and getting them permanently off the streets into housing.
It also sounds like there's a broader issue of criminal justice, whether or not if a person, for example, has a prison record, whether they can get a job, whether they can get an apartment, whether they qualify. And frankly, what is the responsibility of local, regional, state, and the federal government to help people who are out of a job?
I mean, there are multiple, right, yes, multiple aspects of the political side and as well as the private sector. I mean, landlords. One of the main parts of our staff's work is going around to landlords pitching for this client that we have here to show that, you know what, the paperwork, their criminal record may show this, but here's this person who has served time, who has done, you know, his part to get back into a home again.
When we talk about the political aspects, there's a local ones and there's more state and national. At the state and national level, it's continuing a major focus on not just homelessness, but all of the associated systems that feed into homelessness. Too often, the folks that fall through the crack of the reentry programs, they fall through the crack of the aging out of foster care or the mental health system. Folks that fall through all those cracks of all those different systems, they're very vulnerable individuals. They end up being the responsibility of the homeless system to try to build them back up and help them. And what we really need, the elephant in the room so often, is mental health. We've housed so many people in Houston. We're really down to some very challenging individuals. And we really got to focus on, you know, why are there still people on the streets? Why do we even have encampments? And the real reason is that we need to plug some of these gaps in rungs above, like in the mental health system. The city is working with the Harris Center like it's never worked before. We're successful in getting, in the last legislative session, more funding to come to Houston for mental health, but that's just a drop in the bucket. And you know, the mayor has asked for, you know, more resources from the state and from the feds. And from a local, which Thao, you have to deal with as well, is if the answer is housing, and we don't want to just keep moving the homeless around from neighborhood to neighborhood. We want to get them completely off. But if every neighborhood rejects us to build quality Class A type of housing in that neighborhood, our hands are kind of tied. If we don't want them on the streets, where can they go? But if you won't allow us to build that alternative, then it gets very, very difficult. So it's about the community working with the organizations, with their elected officials, with the state and federal, all together on this issue.
And those interests for the community and the people, and there's been stories obviously in the media about people who spend a whole lot of money investing in a business or in their home, and then they have the homeless come to their neighborhood and their values depreciate and things go south, and they're not very happy about it. So that's a legitimate concern that as part of what you all do should be considered, and not just sloughed
Right.
off and say, too bad, too sad, we're going to do it in your neighborhood.
For sure, and that's why when the city invests in projects, we make sure they're Class A and they're contributing to the neighborhood. And in fact, there's been studies, even by the United Way, has actually seen property values increase where we're building our permanent supportive housing communities, and that's because it's done the right way. We know exactly what you're talking about. We want to be good neighbors. We want to help people be good neighbors and contribute to every community in the city, and that's why we feel the responsibility to make sure that these communities are nice.
I'd like to know what the plan is at the city. I've worked with Marc on a lot of projects, and I'd like to know what the plan is for succession. You're young enough, and you've got more than 100 partners represented here, but what is the plan for the future? Because it's heavily dependent on folks at the table, specifically at the table. And I've
We're not
seen you
wishing
in action.
any ill will to you, though.
No, but
Yeah, we're still young.
What's the long-term plan?
You know, I worry. I think one of the main things is that the system was very concerned about changes in leadership all the time. And so one thing is we wanted to institutionalize this system that we've created so that no matter who's at what organization or who's holding what office, that this system can continue to evolve and achieve what it's achieving. At the same time, it's lucky that it is truly 100 different organizations. And it's Thao with her amazing team and her amazing board. It's at the coalition and those folks there and all these
so
other
much
agencies.
charitable and private effort that goes into
Absolutely.
this that is not costing the city, not costing the taxpayers. Very impressive.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, there's been a real paradigm shift in this whole field in tackling homelessness by all of us who have been in it, as Marc described, to go from independent agencies trying to raise money and touting our own little numbers or big numbers, and to now really thinking about this as a community impact. So we can be sitting with each other and saying that we contributed to this. It's not just Search alone or Star of Hope or Salvation Army or any of these organizations, but together we've been able to reduce homelessness. When we were doing it on our own, we weren't able to.
Do we find the success that you've described encouraging more homeless people to come from other cities and come to Houston so they can add on to your problem?
I think that's part of the shift in our mindset. I think that is something that's natural for people to come to conclude, but it is not what we find at all. The bulk,
Actually, the numbers are down.
right, and the numbers of people, the people that are here and have been here, were here. It's not necessarily new people. Yes, sometimes when we get a Katrina spike, one of these kind of crazy disasters, it may bring people here and they may stay, but a lot of people go back home. So that's
Do your groups prioritize homeless people with children? Is that the most important thing you deal with first?
So that was another part of this paradigm shift that we had early on, is we prioritize the people who are the most vulnerable first, and those were the people on the street who are sick and the most likely to die. And now we are able, because we've been able to successfully move that needle, we have been actually working with families for the last 3 years as our priority. And now we're able to actually shift to folks that aren't chronically homeless, meaning they don't necessarily have a disability and they haven't been on the street for a long time. But we're able to kind of get those people who were on the fringe, homeless, have been homeless for a while, but can get back into homes quickly. So yes, families are a big part of it. In fact, one of our programs at Search is all about breaking the cycle of homelessness, and it starts with the children. We know that with the adults, stabilization is the key. We want to help them stabilize as much as possible. But with the children, we've got to stop this from happening again.
And that's where we were back in the day. Every organization doing their own thing with their own goals and their own strategies. And because we operate as a system, all 100 agencies have the same set of goals, same set of strategies. As Thao mentioned, we're focused on the most vulnerable individuals that have disabilities, on veterans, and on families with youth, and then also women who are victims of domestic violence. But in the past, we put a little bit in each bucket of homelessness, each type. And you do that, you spread it so thin you don't have any impact. So we're really focused in those buckets I just mentioned so that we can maximize that impact. And for folks that homelessness is not a moral issue or it's not a religious issue, it's also a financial issue. We spend more money walking past or driving past a homeless individual on the street than it costs to actually house them. From the cleaning up the streets to the healthcare to the police to the ambulance, the number one cost is the emergency room cost. So there's actually really true cost savings. It's not only the compassionate thing to do, it's the fiscally smart thing to do, is to help house our homeless in their cycle of homelessness.
Yeah, just one more point on that. Our data, so we targeted the folks who were the highest users of the ER system, and we were able to reduce their use by 71% from the 2 years before they entered us and till the 2 years after they were in housing. So it's dramatic. Some of these people, one particular person had been in the ER 160 times in these 2 years.
I got one final question. We're in our final minute. Is there any other things we could do to help continue to make significant progress that you all have outlined here today with our homeless problem?
I think really focusing on the long-term answer and not just reacting.
Marc, your take?
Yeah, we've had progress, but there's still a lot more to do, and we really need to work on getting those mental health resources.
So is Marc like the coordinator of all this? Is that what we say?
No, not at all.
Okay,
I
so
just
Thao's in charge of it.
There you go.
No.
And folks can help out. Folks can go to www.homelessness.org thewayhomehouston.org. They can find out more information. Who are these
Very good.
agencies and how they
Helpful,
can help.
and they can
Yes.
also donate to
Absolutely.
the agencies as opposed to giving to the panhandlers, which
Right.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Gives
Well,
us hope.
Yeah.
You
it
give
does.
us hope.
There, this is actually good news. So, Thao,
It
I want to
is.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Marc, thank you for coming. Barbara, always a pleasure, dear.
Love it.
There is some good news out there, folks. We're making progress on this issue.